Hello and welcome to the A-Plus Show, episode 7. It's good to be in studio with BizNews founder Alec Hogg. Alec?
I'm very pleased to see that you remember the number, because given that we had 5 in Davos, 7, these are the real shows, though. These are the ones we do here in our studio.
Yes.
And we're always catching up on what's happened in the past week.
So this is a week in which I assumed the editorial reins, so I've had my hands full. And you're going to discover that we've been focusing on different areas. So the show is going to change slightly somewhat today. I'm going to have some sound bites. Alec is not. And he's going to use his gift of the gab to talk us through the next 30 minutes as we jibber jabber, as he likes to say.
Indeed. Just maybe a bit of housekeeping. Michael's now taken over as the editor of BizNews. It doesn't mean that I'm going anywhere. I'm here to support you. I look after the Daily Insider, which is our big morning newsletter. I've taken over that so that Stuart can then focus on making money for us with Clive. So we've got a bit of balance now to the team, if you want to put it that way. A lot of my work will be done across the whole business, but certainly not as many interviews as I was doing in the past. And that's for you and your editorial team. And we saw this week the very first interview that Victoria Ashwin did, and we can talk about that a little bit later. That was on the whole Tongaat story, which just seems to go from worse to even worse.
Indeed. Well, let's just go down and do the laundry list of what we're here to discuss. I'm going to look at the National Prosecuting Authority. I did an interview with a spokesperson for the Investigating Directorate just about the red notices issued to the Guptas. Serendipitous, call it what you will. I interview the NPID spokesperson, and a few days later, the Guptas get arrested. So those red notices will discuss the Guptas' arrest. Then I called her a Jill of all trades, remarkable woman, Judith February. She's taken over as the executive officer at Freedom Under Law.
Lovely interview, I must say. And doesn't she speak beautifully?
Oh, indeed. Indeed. I think Ross, our colleague, really enjoyed editing that one. And one of the comments was, man, she's got a lovely voice.
and her elocution.
Just her demeanor, absolutely.
Top class.
What does she have to say about our esteemed number one, Cyril Ramaphosa, and all the allegations that have been heaped on him from Arthur Fraser? We'll discuss that. She has an interesting take on that. And then Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian president, he was speaking to the Financial Times, our partners, some interesting comments about a stalemate and what that might mean, and do not talk about us without us. Your side, Alec?
Yeah, stalemate is not exactly what Ukraine wants. They want victory. I had some discussions with Piet, Viljoen and Kokkie Kooyman, which were the basis for this week's Boardroom Talk, which is the column that I write for the premium subscribers. We can go into that in some detail. I'd like to touch on Tongaat, not just because Victoria did her first interview there, but it is a story that then flows into the next one, which is Deloitte, which this morning our partners at the Wall Street Journal had an exclusive where they have got information that Deloitte is looking to split its audit function from its consulting function, which is not surprising because the way that these partnerships work is that they have to carry the can for both sides at the moment. And I think the consulting guys are not feeling terribly happy about the costs that the auditing people are incurring through not picking up fraud at things like Tongaat and Steinhoff, of course.
Remember to have me tell you about Deloitte and how they crop up in the Gupta story.
Yeah.
There is a meeting of stories here. But okay, let's kick things off. The National Prosecuting Authority, the ID spokesperson, Sindisiwe Saboka. I spoke to her last week, and this was after a number of significant arrests on the Transnet side of things. And she said in that interview, watch the space. Now, we hear this a lot.
Yeah.
Watch the space, more arrests are coming. It wasn't a few days later. And 8:10, I'm sitting on the couch, in pops a message from the National Prosecuting Authority in my WhatsApp. Guptas have been arrested. I mean, this was something I wouldn't think would happen for several years. I actually wrote that editorial piece saying I didn't see it happening. And this all comes from the application by the National Prosecuting Authority to Interpol to issue red notices for the Guptas, who we suspected were hanging out in the United Arab Emirates and had been since at least February 2018, when Jacob Zuma stepped down on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2018. He steps down. The Guptas realize that their shield of impunity is no longer there. They leave the country. Things were getting a little bit too hot for them. Here is Sindisiwe Saboka speaking about those red notices.
So we got the red notices issued by Interpol in February this year. We had initially requested for 8 people who are currently out of the country. This is 4 Indian nationals who are business persons for the various companies in which the money was laundered. Then the 2 Gupta wives and the 2 brothers. We don't have anything on the other Gupta brother. So what we requested for the 8, Interpol has granted us 6 red notices. The first 4 were granted last year already.
So, Alec, Atul and Rajesh Gupta, 2 out of the 3 Gupta brothers, in custody in the United Arab Emirates. NPA will send a team over there. There's going to be an extradition application. In terms of the application of the rules of natural justice, the Guptas have a right to, in an Emirati court, fight their extradition. So, prepare yourself, South Africa. We're used to waiting. We're going to wait some more. But at least there's movement there, except the 3rd Gupta brother. He's out. He's obviously organizing all the money. The best legal teams are going to obviously defend these guys.
AJ, and as she said, we have nothing on him.
Yeah.
Which is strange.
Yes, it is strange. But I'm not saying it's early days, but he must just be one of the brothers that somehow kept his hands clean. I don't know how that's possible, but he is, for the moment, the one brother that is not wanted in connection with very much, it seems. So,
well, the whole country celebrated that. It's interesting to see that it's 4 years that it took from the time the Guptas left to when the red notice was formally granted. And then it's taken, 4 months for the red notice to finally be used in anger.
Yeah.
You just wonder what they did to get themselves nabbed. Perhaps they were trying to leave the country, but I'm sure that'll all come out in the post, as it were. From our side, in Boardroom Talk, and I resuscitated Boardroom Talk a few weeks ago. It was the original newsletter that created MoneyWeb, which was my first startup. I started writing it in 1996, when there were about as many people who were receiving Boardroom Talk via fax as they were via emails. So it takes you back a bit. And it was actually written as a column for a newspaper, for the Afrikaans newspaper Beeld, where my dear late friend Flippy Meyer decided that he would call it Direksie Praatjies, which means Boardroom Talk, and that's where it all came from. So this is, I suppose, a bit of Flippy's legacy. This week I spoke to Piet Viljoen and Kokkie Kooyman after reading the Corian report. I had a chat with David Bacher of Corian last week. Corian brings out a report every month where they have a look at the performances of the major asset classes for the period going back a year, but in particular what happened in the past month. And Piet and Kokkie are both cock-a-hoop at the moment. Piet is managing the very best unit trust, or the highest performing unit trust in the country. It's doubled in 3 years, which is quite an achievement. And in the last year, it was up 31.2%. That's the Counterpoint Value Fund that he looks after. Why this is relevant was in 2015, when his theme, value, was so out of favor that Ned Group, which is a unit trust management company that has what is called best of breed. So they will go and find the best managers, the best money managers, and then give them money to manage on behalf of the clients of Ned Group. And it's really a way, supposedly, where you can get the best brains in the country by going through one money manager. Well, in 2015, they felt that Piet was doing so badly that they removed from him their flagship fund, which he had run since he started his company in 2003. So it was a real slap in the face to him. But now to see him come back and be number one in the country is I'm one of the first people in the front of the queue applauding. Well done to Piet Viljoen. Piet's also the only keynote speaker who's going to have been at all 4 of the BizNews conferences come August. He's back in August to give us his wisdom. This year we will have, or this conference, we'll have Cy Jacobs, who's another really, really good asset manager from 361, and he and Piet have different styles, and so they'll be debating it, where the markets are going and what the best opportunities are. It should be really a crackerjack session. And then Kokkie Kooyman has been a financial services guru, not just here, but internationally. His financial services funds have been the best performing in the world on various occasions over the past 35 years that he's been doing this. And at last, after 10 years in the desert, because financial services shares have done really badly, suddenly they're back in form. And I had a good chat to Kokkie as well, which again formed part of the column, to find out from him what were the best opportunities and whether, after having a good run, being the highest performing sector, financial services still had some scope to go higher. He said it's only just started, and he was very keen on ABSA, which is interesting because in a previous issue of A-Plus, mentioned that having met Ari Rautenbach, the new chief executive of ABSA, I was pretty impressed. So
where'd you meet him, Alec?
In Davos.
That's right.
Yeah. And so if you're looking to diversify your portfolio and put it into a stock that you think could do very well for you, then ABSA is a nice one. And if you are a unit trust investor, just know that the Piet Viljoen story tells us, don't chop and change. Find your manager, give your money to them, and let them manage it over an extended period of time, and you will be rewarded, as Piet's supporters have been.
Okay. Thanks, Alec. Judith February. President Cyril Ramaphosa has his detractors. He is facing a second term potentially. He's at least vying for it when the ANC's National Elective Conference convenes in December this year.
But this is interesting now, because he can get elected as the president of the ANC.
Yes.
But he might not be the president of the country, depending on what happens in 2024.
There's a disconnect.
Interesting.
There's a disconnect.
Yeah. Whereas in the past, it was always it was obvious you were the president of the ANC and you became the president of the country, which is interesting. So I guess, I keep saying this. We do, as a nation, we're so used to the ANC running things that we just assume that they're going to continue running things, as Jacob Zuma said, until Judgment Day.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not, but it is that elective conference is very important.
So what the ANC has always tried to avoid is what they call 2 centers of power. And that is where somebody leads the political party, the ANC, and somebody is the figurehead in the head of state. And they've always tried to make sure that that is the same person. Otherwise, you have these contesting centers of power. So that's what... so it is incumbent upon the head of the ANC to be the head of state. That's the principle from which they work. But Arthur Fraser, former spy boss, man not without controversy at all. He was the man who freed Jacob Zuma on medical parole, unlawfully so. So ruled the courts that whole medical parole issue currently in the courts. It's being appealed. And I asked Judith February, who is well, get ready. She's an author, a columnist, former sports administrator on the interim board of Cricket South Africa. She's an attorney. She is what have I left out? She's just a remarkable woman, and she's taken over as Freedom Under Law's new executive officer, taking over from Nicole Fritz. And I asked Judith February what she made of these allegations which have been lodged against the president.
The president does have questions to answer, and I think we need to be very careful about what is going on here. We understand that the last part of the Zondo Commission report is going to be coming out. There will be findings about the State Security Agency and Arthur Fraser's role in that. This is trite to say the radical economic transformers, that faction of the ANC, they are gearing up because they need to. And so there's all manner of propaganda out there and untruth and the sowing of chaos. It's very tempting to say, well, Arthur Fraser is a bad guy, and so therefore, he's got a bit of a dodgy reputation, so therefore we must discount what is said and we believe the president wholeheartedly. I think we must not take off our thinking caps.
Very good. Yeah, wasn't Arthur Fraser also the guy who featured prominently in Jacques Pauw's book?
Yes.
Which I remember reading it and thinking, this guy is bad news. And very deeply implicated in so many things. And you wonder, how does he stay in such a powerful position as being able to decide whether Jacob Zuma goes to jail or not?
So when Ramaphosa came in, he got shifted. He got shifted in 2018. I think it was April 2018. He got shifted from State Security Agency as the DG there to Correctional Services. Now, in the head of Ramaphosa, I won't pretend to speak for him, but he must have thought, let me put this guy somewhere where he can't make any trouble. He moves him to Correctional Services into such a pivotal portfolio that Cyril Ramaphosa couldn't have known that Arthur Fraser moved to a seemingly not insignificant, but he put him in and look after the jails, that he would be responsible and could be the person upon which Jacob Zuma's freedom would hinge. He couldn't have known that in 2018.
But why does he even keep him? If you've got a situation in a company, in the private sector, where somebody is implicated in corruption, you get rid of them. You get them out of the system. And yet it seems within the ANC that that's impossible. You had all of these real nefarious fellows who were ending up in very powerful positions. Perhaps not as powerful as they were, but surely to goodness, we need to grow up as a democracy and realize that when we have bad eggs or bad apples, they must be ejected, not left to go and rot another part of what is a taxpayer-funded organization.
Batibile Dlamini, the former social development minister, used to say the reason that you can have good and seeming bad and good people in the party is because of this ideal of unity, that unity at all costs. And Ramaphosa has nailed his colors to the flag there. He wants unity of the party at the expense of the country. He has said as much, unfortunately. And she spoke about there are smaller nyana skeletons in the closet. Everybody has them, and that's what stops somebody in a position from calling out and firing somebody, because they're going to say, I'm going to spill all the beans on what goes on within the ANC. We all know each other's secrets. It's a collective pact. It's what defends everybody. It's what keeps everybody safe. So, perhaps it's obvious Arthur Fraser is a man who knows. He was the Director General of State Security. He has a history in intelligence. There are a lot of secrets that the man knows. Perhaps in this drive for unity, he kept him around. I don't know the exact answer to that, but it's not good.
But in South Africa, state intelligence is an oxymoron. There's no question about that. Certainly the documentation we've seen or the allegations that have been made. I remember back in 1996 or 7, where Thabo Mbeki alleged that Tokyo Sekhwali and Cyril Ramaphosa were trying to have him bumped off. So he got them out. He got them out of the
Brown Moles report.
And Matthews Pauza, it was the three of them. His three threats to his presidency, or three potential bidders or candidates against him. He got them out of the system. So I suppose that's what Ramaphosa should have done, rather than putting these fellows like Arthur Fraser, because they were going to turn on him anyway.
Look, I think ultimately, and people are asking what's the motive behind Arthur Fraser raising something now for a robbery and an alleged cover-up that happened in February 2020. Why raise it now? It's 6 months before the elective campaign. If Ramaphosa somehow gets charged magically, because just remember, the going to lay a criminal complaint doesn't equal criminal charges. The NPA needs to decide on that. If somehow, miraculously, the NPA says, whoa, this is a hell of a strong case, we are going to prefer charges against the sitting head of state, he would then have to step aside in terms of the ANC's resolution. Okay. That could be what is driving Arthur Fraser here, who could be a figurehead of this RET fight back. that is one side of the story.
If Jacques Pauw's disclosures are even half right, Arthur Fraser himself should be in jail. And maybe that's where the ANC should be looking internally to not paper over these cracks. Anyway, come 2024, we have an opportunity as a nation to show them how we feel about these things.
Judith February making the point, though, that bad people can still say true things. So let's not take our thinking caps off just because we don't like who's making the allegation. Tongaat.
Yeah, Tongaat is it used to be KwaZulu-Natal's great industrial company for many years, for decades. It was a bastion of the province, sugarcane farmer, and then decided that they would turn the sugarcane's farms into a property development. When you drive along Mklanga, you'll see virtually the whole of that area has been developed by Tongaat Hulett. So they took the old farms and then turned them into property developments and made an enormous amount of money for shareholders. They also invested heavily in starch, and the starch side of it was a very good part of the business. What Tongaat did, though, unfortunately, was it invested in Zimbabwe in a big way on the hope and a prayer, I guess, that Zimbabwe would eventually come right, which it hasn't. It's been a festering sore for the business for many, many years now. There was also, to try and keep everything going, the allegations and the former Tongaat executives have all been in court and charged that they've cooked the books, essentially. And the auditors there were the same auditors that were involved at Steinhoff. Anyway, we'll get onto that in a moment, those auditors, Deloitte. But our new colleague, Victoria Ashwin, got her teeth into the story this week. And I thought she did a pretty good job of pulling the various parts together, because it's an incredibly complex story. What happened was a company called Magista, which is essentially a Zimbabwean operation. These guys are coming in to bail out Tongaat Hulett, which owes the banks between 6 and 8 billion rands. Yes. So the market value, if you want to go and buy all of Tongaat Hulett today, it'll only cost you 400 million rand. But that's because it's got liabilities of 8 billion. So when you buy it for 400 million, you immediately take on debt of 8 billion. So it isn't that you're picking up the company on the cheap. But the banks have been screwing over Tongaat Hulett now for a long time and calling the shots. And in the interview that Victoria did with Chris Logan, the most telling point that Logan makes was that it's about time that Tongaat's executives say, this is crazy, we can't keep working for the banks indefinitely. Call their bluff and say to the banks, if we go a belly up, you lose 8 billion. So take part of that 8 billion rand and convert it into equity. It happens all the time when financial services companies or financial organizations lend money to a company that gets into trouble. To get it out of the problems, generally what tends to happen is that they give it more money, but they take an equity stake. It happened with Steinhoff's American business called Mattress Firm. And what Steinhoff did there was the bank said, we'll continue to fund you, but we want 50% of the equity. So Steinhoff only, even though it paid nearly $4 billion for that business, it only owns half of it because it was so indebted to the banks. The bank said, we'll keep funding you, we won't pull the plug, but we want half of the upside. So it's a normal thing for banks to get involved in the equity in the short term. They don't want to be owning businesses indefinitely. Yeah. But if they're going to be funding the businesses, they want to participate in the upside. In Tongaat's instance, there's been none of that.
Do we know why the banks don't want to take an equity stake?
The banks have just played hardball, and Tongaat has just folded at every instance. Now, the other big thing that's happening here is that Deloitte did pay a fee, I'm getting mixed up with Steinhoff. They paid about 1 billion rand to Steinhoff. They're on the hook to Tongaat, but we don't know how much for yet because we haven't had that process going through. But it's got to be billions of rands that Tongaat should be able to sue Deloitte for, because Deloitte turned a blind eye towards what was happening. And we as investors and the banks themselves acted on the information that they were given from the auditors. That's how capitalism works, is that you've got auditors who check the books, and if auditors get it wrong, they must pay, because they get paid very handsomely for checking the books. So if you take what Logan is saying, and he's been around a long, long time, Chris Logan, a very smart guy. He's saying that the banks should convert in a lot of their debt into equity. They should then take a very more close interest in getting this company rescued, getting it working again. And then you won't have to give away the business to Zimbabweans who are buying it on the cheap, which is essentially what is happening at the moment, or could happen. So it's a mess of monumental proportions. The guy who's running the business was brought in from SAB Miller. He has a good reputation. He's done a pretty good job under trying circumstances. But his name's Gavin Hudson. But his problem is that his chairman has just resigned. So Louis von Zierner, who himself was a banker, he's gone off into the sunset. He's had enough. So you can see, Mike, this is a problem that has got lots of parts to the lots of chapters still in the book, including the one of the former Tongaat execs who are being criminally charged for fraud.
And you wrote about the conflict of interest for auditors here, and Deloitte's name comes up in this particular saga, but is also linked to the case in which the Guptas have had the red notice issued, and that is for fraud and money laundering, and that is in relation to the infamous Estina dairy farm, the failed dairy project in the Free State, and that is where 24.9 million rand was taken from the Free State Agriculture Department and given to one Iqbal Sharma, who had a company called Nulane Investments. And this was to do a feasibility study and to see whether this Estina dairy farm could work. Now, this is classic Guptas. I've seen this so many times. We'll speak about this, the asbestos project in the Free State. But 24.9 million rand to do a feasibility study. Now, that's money for jam. He can't do it. He has no skills. He subcontracts to Deloitte, who do it for 1.5 million rand. Now that is pretty...
Just give us those numbers again.
So 24.25 million rand to do a feasibility study.
Mr. Sharma gets. He can't do the job. He's a Gupta acolyte. He's well known in the industry for sitting on boards. I think he was at Transnet. He floats about and makes money for the Guptas and himself. And then they pay Deloitte to do that feasibility study for 1.5 million rand. That was their modus operandi. They did a lot of that at Eskom. I know from the inside information we got on Mark Pomensky, because we broke that story here at BizNews ages ago with the Pomensky story at Eskom. And our moles who were around there said the way they would do it, there was one, I don't want to get this guy into trouble, so I'll keep it as broad as possible. But there was a relatively small businessman who was asked to do a project, and he quoted 300,000 rand for the project. He was told by Pomensky and Co. That was far too little. It needed to be 3 million at least. And then that escalated from 3 million to something like 30 million. So it was of that order, where as long as they had something, some project that was being done, doesn't matter how small a project it was, they were just charging the absolute earth for it. So it sounds like this is similar, and Deloitte, in this case, were being used in the same way as the small businessman that I was talking about earlier.
That's correct. I want to quickly, so that 1.5 mil goes to Deloitte, and then Mr. Sharma, with his handsome profit, the Guptas wanted their stake, of course, and this is where Atul and Rajesh Gupta tie in. The 21 odd million, he obviously took his cut, but 21 million of that 24.9 gets laundered, but ends up in a company called Island Site Investments, and that the directors of that company are Atul, Rajesh Gupta, and their wives. That is where this ties in. I just quickly want to mention how this modus operandi of paying subcontractors and getting a very overinflated price right at the top on the asbestos heist in the Free State. And this is where Edwin Sodi, these are all people that were arrested initially. This is where the former Free State Premier and the suspended Secretary General of the ANC is implicated. 255 million rand is paid to the housing department, and this is to go and check whether there are still asbestos roofs in parts of the Free State. It's an audit, but also they're supposed to remove the asbestos.
255 million to audit and remove
255. These guys, Edwin Sodi and these guys, they don't have any skills to do this. They subcontract. Now, it gets subcontracted. I cannot remember what the exact fee was on that, but it goes to somebody, and it's for a pittance of the 255. Those guys can't do the job either. So somebody gets their cut. It goes to a third company, subcontracted, for 2.5 million rand.
But Michael, this is BEE in practice. This is what happens with BEE in practice. It's supposed to be a way of empowering and uplifting people, but it's actually enriching the politically connected, because they are putting these BEE companies, these front companies, not front companies, just people who are well connected in between so many of the transactions that it's making this country just totally uncompetitive. South African Airways, when they bought their fuel, they couldn't go straight to Shell and BP and get the jet fuel there. They had to buy it through a BEE company who took their cut. Now, what the Gupta story and what you've laid out for us here is showing us is that cut isn't modest.
No.
That cut is a multiple of what the value of the product is or the service that we're getting. So please, for goodness sake, we've got to address this festering sore which is bankrupting the country.
The SAA story, it reminds me of the gentleman who couldn't remember when he got married. He had no marketable skills. Vuyisile Ntseko. They inserted themselves into deals as supplier development, as part of the supplier development program. And they had absolutely no skills in the aviation industry. And it was one of the greatest remarks made by Advocate Kate Hoffmeyer. Why would SAA want to partner with your company to work with your daughter who has no skills in the aviation industry at all? And he sat there and went, well, when I started, I also didn't have any skills. But I mean, that's not an acceptable answer. Anyway, all right, let's move on to my
astonishing Deloitte. Oh, aren't you? No, before we go to Deloitte, yeah?
Oh, yes, no. My last story is the issue of Volodymyr Zelenskyy. The war is over 100 days now, and the Russians have launched a new offensive in the east and the south, and there's questions around what the end may look like. And are we going to see a negotiated settlement? And Ukraine is saying there's too many people speaking about what's going on without us. And this was from an exclusive interview that the Financial Times had with President Zelenskyy. And this is him speaking through an interpreter.
There cannot be some talks behind Ukraine's back. Any kinds of expectations from certain countries that we are going to weaken our position, we need to wait, or perhaps Ukraine is going to be distressed economically, or perhaps Ukraine is going to be destructed infrastructurally, and then perhaps Ukraine will be willing to exceed some concessions. But we have already lost too many people simply to cede our territory. That is not possible.
So the question is, and that was one of the questions to him, are you looking to just regain territorially what you had from the 24th of February this year, or are you looking to rewrite and take it back to 2014? And he said, look, our immediate priority is to get back the territory we've lost since the start of this war. But ideally, they're looking to have Russia removed from their territory, and that includes then the Donbass, the disputed annexed Crimea as well. So, interesting story.
Well, that was they were very firm on that in Davos. And
Yeah.
it was interesting that they sent women parliamentarians to Davos.
Yeah.
And these ladies were feisty, as we both had the opportunity to. I had dinner with one at a small table, and then we engaged quite a lot with these parliamentarians. And they were vociferously arguing that the problem was in 2014 when the Russians moved in for the first time and the West didn't do anything, wasn't arming Ukraine, wasn't helping Ukraine in any way. And so the Russians could then take over Crimea, as you mentioned, and parts of the Donbass. And we know all of this now because most of us are paying attention to what's going on there. The reason for that is that if Ukraine were to fall, next comes Poland, then comes, who knows, Germany. So there are many reasons why the Ukrainians are saying what they're saying. I had, in one of the conversations with one of the parliamentarians, I did say to her, why do you think that if you weren't able to push the Russians out in the Donbass between 2014 and 2022, that you would now be able to do so? She said the difference is weapons. We've now got the armaments, and we mustn't forget that these missile launchers are on their way to the Ukrainians. These missile launchers that can shoot 75 kilometers. I think they're sending 48 from the United States. They're on their way. When they get into the field, it's going to change everything. Yeah. So for the moment, if the Ukrainians can just kind of hang in there and hold the lines, they believe that they'll be able to turn the Russian forces and send them back. It was very interesting that this past week, the man who was in charge, the general in charge of the entire Donbass region for Russia, was killed. So there's been an edict coming out of the Kremlin that because the war wasn't going well for Russia, that the generals had to get into the front line. And they've lost over a dozen, I believe, now at this point of their top military brass. All of this has got to be playing into some kind of a cocktail somewhere. But we do have people who still believe that there was so much wrong going on in Ukraine that Putin was justified to invade it. I haven't heard a cogent argument for that on how an autocracy can invade a democracy. But you're going to go to the Russian embassy. Yeah.
I was just looking to dovetail there. So much of what the Western media has carried has been the message from Ukraine and its allies. And as part of the priority to bring balance at BizNews, I put an interview request to speak to Ambassador Rogachev, the Russian ambassador to South Africa. And I got a response, and very graciously, the press attaché, they said the ambassador is busy, but the press attaché will be speaking to BizNews next week, so look out for that.
Can't wait. My final story is on Deloitte, just to follow through that thread, and that goes into the Steinhoff story. And just to repeat for those who haven't really followed what happened there, Steinhoff fraud was committed mostly in Europe. And the reason why it was undetected for so long was that there was a little audit firm in Germany that did the audit of Steinhoff Europe for decades, literally decades. This audit firm then provided figures to Deloitte, which Deloitte had to accept. Now, here's the problem. Deloitte at the time said, but we want to go and have a look at the underlying numbers. And they were told by Markus Jooste, you cannot, because if we had to fire this German audit firm, it would be a terrible thing for the founder of Steinhoff, Bruno Steinhoff.
He had a relationship with him.
Going back to the 60s. Yeah. So this had been the audit firm, according to Jooste, that had audited Steinhoff from when he was essentially a sole trader. And he would never countenance them being pushed aside for Deloitte to take over. At that point, Deloitte should have said, no, we refuse, we withdraw. But they didn't because of the fees that were earned. Subsequent to the Steinhoff disaster, Deloitte has changed its policies worldwide, and now it will not allow that ever to happen again. So it had a policy, I suppose, an informal policy where it had to go in and check the underlying numbers. But in this case, it turned a blind eye because the fees were so high. And that brings us to the next part of the Deloitte story, which is in the Wall Street Journal this morning, the exclusive story that they've brought to say that Deloitte is now considering following EY, the old Ernst & Young, into splitting its business into a consulting business on the one hand and an audit business on the other hand. And the reason for that, you can be sure, is that the partners within Deloitte are saying, the consulting arm are saying, hang on a minute, these guys in the auditing arm are costing us a lot of money. And it's a very risky, a very high risk area, because if they get something wrong in the audit of a company like Steinhoff, it is a huge bill that has to be paid by partners. And in a case like that, obviously they take insurance for it, professional indemnity insurance, but you can imagine with the number of claims that have been pushed forward to the insurers that the cost of this indemnity insurance has been skyrocketing. So if you're sitting on the consulting side, you're saying, hang on a minute, I would be much happier in a business where I didn't have to pay insurance so that my audit guys are protected if something goes wrong there. It's an interesting development, one that was proposed after the global financial crisis. At that point in time, there was a lot of concern about the way that the audit profession managed itself and how there was a conflict of interest that we saw only too clearly in the Steinhoff matter, where the auditor, who is the policeman, is being paid in a way by the criminal.
There's been so much blind trust and blind faith put in the audit profession. I mean, somebody like Anur Singh is a chartered accountant. Anur Singh is a chartered accountant.
Marcus Jooste is a chartered accountant.
Marcus Jooste is a chartered accountant.
Syker did the unheard of when they kicked him out of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. I don't know if Anur Singh is still a member there. Perhaps not.
No, Syker has booted him.
Also booted him too.
Yeah.
But up until that point, he was a member of this esteemed body. So there is a lot of change that is going to happen in time to come, and a lot of it instigated by what happened in our little South Africa.
Well, what a fascinating... We hope it was half an hour. I think it was a little bit more, Alec. We've been naughty today. Sorry, guys.
Well, we did jibber-jabber a little more than we thought, but it's always a pleasure to bring the past week's developments into context and to give some of the backstory, which just makes it a heck of a lot more understandable, we hope, to our community. So thanks for being with us again. Yeah,
that brings to a close episode 7. Alec, it is the 16th, is the Thursday. It's a public holiday. Are we looking to bring an A-Plus show next week, or are we going to come back in 2 weeks?
2 weeks' time.
2 weeks' time. See you then.